Hey everybody, Dave here with another model rocket assembly video, and today we're looking at the Quest Boingo micro-roc. And this is a very small kit. It's also very simple, as you can see here. There aren't a lot of parts. And it's meant to be flown on the really tiny 6mm Micromax motors, which are about the equivalent to a 1/8A engine. The nice thing about these is that they can be flown in a relatively small space. About a 50-foot radius is sufficient. And so these can be flown in a backyard or in a small park or something like that. Most of the actual micro-roc models that Quest puts out are already put together. They're made of plastic, they're molded, and they come ready to fly. You just need to put a motor in them. This is one of the few actual kits they put out, although I've seen a few other companies now are coming up with micro-roc kits as well. Many of them are subscale versions of their larger model rockets. Let's just go quickly through this. There aren't a lot of parts, as I said, and the instructions here are nice, full color, very detailed. And so we'll just pull these out here. The body tube is very small. That. Okay, we have a little bit of fin stock. It's also very thin. And because of the small parts in this rocket, even though it's pretty easy to put together, you might not want to use this as your very first rocket. Get some experience with larger pieces first, because in this one even a small mistake can add up to a large change in the aerodynamics. Okay, this is the actual motor mount. It's very tiny. This is the centering ring for the motor mount. This is the engine block. This uses a 1/16 inch launch lug, and the launch system for this is very much smaller than your standard 1/8 inch. The nose cone here is actually a foam type earplug, and it's going to go into this simply by squishing it down and letting it expand again. And we'll come back to that in the instructions later on. I just wanted to show you this. But because of its origin here, if you have a different color earplug of the same type, you could actually substitute it out and give yourself a different nose cone. Notice there's no recovery system. This uses featherweight recovery, and it actually drops on its nose. Okay, now before we get into the building, I want to actually skip down to the very end and talk about finishing for just a moment. And it actually doesn't show a whole lot about it. Somewhere here mentions it. But they suggest finishing this using colored markers, Sharpies or magic markers or things like this. And that's fine. There's also no reason you couldn't paint this. But what I do suggest is coloring the fins at least first before you put them on. Because once they get glued onto the rocket, they become a little bit more fragile at that glue joint. And so it might be easier to get the coloration you want with less chance of breaking the fins off as you're moving it around. Just a thought. If you are using colored markers, you can actually color the body tube before you glue anything onto it, because the markers won't really affect the glue much. Alright, so when we come back here, I will clear this away. We'll get started on marking the tube and building the motor mount. Assembly of the motor mount is pretty straightforward. If you've built other kits before, it's pretty much the same as those, except this is small. And I'm just going to use a little bit of white glue here. And so first we're just going to put a very small bead of glue here. This is one of the reasons I don't suggest using this as a first kit. because there are places in here where if you get too much glue, it's really going to mess things up. So I've just got a little bead of glue going all the way around there. And I'm going to press this in, and this just needs to be flush. I'm just going to press it down against the surface here, and that's our engine block. Okay, and then the centering ring here, we're going to glue this so that it is centered along the length. I'm just dry fitting this first, so it's going to be about there. And so I'm just going to move this back a little bit and put a bead of glue around this. Again, we don't want too much here because there just isn't a lot of material to be glued, so excess will just get hung up somewhere. Bring that back. And even things like fillets on this, we want to be really, really sparing. That may have been too much there. Again, I'm just going to move this around. Okay, the other edge doesn't really need a fillet because it pushed its glue ahead. Since I've got a little on my finger, we'll put it on there. And now make sure we don't have any on the centering ring itself. So wipe off any excess glue there. Okay, that just needs to dry for a few minutes. We'll come back to step 2 here of mounting inside the body tube, the motor mount there. While it's dry, I'm going to go ahead and skip ahead to step 3 here. So, like other kits, this has a little fin marking guide. And if you don't want to destroy your nice pretty instructions here, you can copy it. We'll make sure there's nothing critical. Yep. Alright. So launch instructions, I've already read those. Okay. Now I'm also going to get a small piece of masking tape ready. And this will simply be used to attach this temporarily to the tube. Okay, so I'm going to wrap this around and overlap the overlap area and then line it up straight here. Now, this is one little problem I can see is because the instructions are on this heavy paper, so is our fin marking guide. And so it's wanting to resist going around the tube here. So if you have a problem where you can't get it to lay flat, go ahead and make a copy of it and cut that out onto regular copy paper. Alright, now we're just going to go through and mark on either side of this where the fins go. Alright, one of these is a launch lug. I'll mark that with an L here so I remember which one it is. Okay, and I've got one more that's under my tape here. It's there. Okay, and now I'm just going to slide that off. And now we need to extend the fin marks an inch from the base, which are actually probably already more than that already. And then the launch lug 2.5 inches down. Now with most models, they recommend using a door frame here to find a straight edge. There, I gotta move things here. My ruler's trying to escape. Alright, but I do need to mark where these lines need to be. So I'm not going to make my my lines with this ruler. I'm just going to make a little crosshatch here. My launch lug, I'm going to come back here, and 2.5 inches right there. Okay, now for the purposes of the video here, I can't easily bring the camera around to a door frame, so I'm going to use my fin marking guide here. So now I'm just going to mark where the fins go. And I do recommend using a pencil for this, that way you can erase any stray marks later. Okay, now my launch lug cross mark is there. It's actually a little bit low, but that's alright. Okay, and I'll come back after we have everything mounted and erase any extraneous lines. So I had a little mistake here on this, and the engine mount was not completely dried when I put it in, and so this shifted everything toward the aft end of the rocket. The centering ring here is stuck at the end, and the motor mount is shoved all the way up instead of having a little overhang here. So before I went on any further, I went ahead and ran this through RockSim. And if you happen to do the same thing that I did here, the rocket is still stable and it's still safe to fly. That being said, we're going to try this again. I've got another motor mount here that I have allowed to dry now for about 3 hours. And we're going to go ahead and mark the 1/8 inch on this again. About there. There we go. And now we'll go ahead and slide this in. It is tight. Okay, so something to be aware of. Okay, but that should be in there nice. And you may need to take a pencil or something and straighten this out a little bit. Okay, but that's in there nice and tight, and that looks the way it's supposed to according to the instructions. So the next part is the fins. All right, now I've taken some paint pens, paint markers, and went ahead and did one side of this. Now the other side, I can't tell where the fin is, so unless I want to color the whole thing one color and have that, I'm going to have to wait till I cut these out to color the other side. Here you can use scissors or a hobby knife. I'm going to use a hobby knife and a ruler here just to get the straightest possible edges. Alright, so we'll just do that 2 more times. I'm going to go ahead and fast forward through this. Do be careful of this. Again, this is very, very thin cardboard, and it comes out of the package with a little bit of a curvature to that. Some of that may go away with painting, which is another reason to color this first. And if it doesn't, you can always bend it a little bit with your fingers to get it straight before you put it on. Even if it still retains a little curvature, as long as the curvature is the same on all the pieces, it's not going to be a big deal. Alright, so when we come back, I'll have all these cut out and fully colored in. I have the fins from 2 kits here, and I've tried a couple of different methods. Some of these I used a regular tip Sharpie on, some of them I used paint pens, and some of them I used a wide chisel tip type of Sharpie. And the wide chisel tip seems to give the best overall appearance here. So this was done with the wide chisel top, so are the blue ones here. You can still see some lining due to differences in coverage, but for example, this was my green Sharpie that had the regular tip, and it's definitely not uniform in color. Over here, this red was done with a paint pen, as was this yellow. They came out fairly well. This red was done with a Sharpie, and the orange here, I started with a paint pen, and my paint was kind of drying up on me, so I finished it off with a Sharpie, and yeah, it looks about the same as what I get with the Sharpie anyway. So those are just some examples. To put these on the rocket, the instructions ask us to take a scrap piece of cardboard, so a little bit of leftover material here, and then we'll put a line of glue on here that will be long enough that we can dip the edge of the fin in it. Alright, now the idea here, and we've got our marked tubes, and we use the non-mistake one there first. The idea here then is to simply dip the entire edge in, get a coating of glue, okay, and then we're going to place this on our fin marked line, where the edge of the fin will be flush with the edge of the tube. Alright, now the tricky part here is going to be making sure our fins are straight and that they don't fall over. And this is just going to require a bit of patience, so I'm just going to have to hold on to this for a few minutes while that fin sets, and then I'll move on to the other ones and then to the launch lug. So I'm sure watching glue dry is not on your favorite things to do, and I will skip through this. While the fins and launch lugs are drying, I want to point out a few differences between these Micro-Max motors and launchers and what you would typically find in a black powder motor. The main thing is the igniters themselves are fairly long, and these use the rocket's own weight to help keep them in place. They've got a little glass bead on here, and that keeps the wires separate. And the motors and this launcher come with a few of these little cardboard sleeves, and these are meant to fit over the igniter there and over that glass bead. Okay, and so you want that to be about half, about centered over the bead, and then you take the igniter wires here and bend them outward. And then this fits into the launcher here. And I'm just going to put a little twist in the igniter wires there. And so this whole thing just slides down in here. And there's actually some friction there to hold that tube in place. Okay? This is the motor. And inside the rocket, then it's going to fit down over the actual igniter wire and be held in place by the weight of the rocket. And so this is much different from the Estes black powder motors that actually have a plug to hold the igniter in. This doesn't have that. And so if we were to use this, I'm going to use a harpoon here. This is one of the ready to fly ones. It actually has a retainer here. And the tricky part is getting it out without breaking the fins. There we go. And so in this case, the motor slides in here with the nozzle facing aft. And then this is just a little bayonet mount, so we just push that in and twist it to realign everything. And again, the trick with this particular rocket is making sure you don't break those little fins off. Okay, so then I'm going to move this up just a bit here. This is the launch rod, and it's not very long. It's actually less than a foot long. And then we just slide this on its little launch guides. And the launch rod is on a pivot so that you can align it directly over the igniter like this. And that igniter wire itself should go all the way up inside. And so now this is ready for launch. All we have to do is hook up the launch clips to this and 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, let it fire. I will actually show some of these in flight at the end of our construction video here. So here are my two rockets, one with the properly installed motor mount and one with the oops motor mount. The fins are drying still, but I think they're dry enough that I can handle them here. I would really recommend you let these dry for at least an hour. But what we're going to do now is put on the nose cone, alright, or nose plug. And according to the instructions, this should go about 1/4 inch or about 1/2 centimeter into the front. And so I went ahead and did a little bit of coloration here so that I could make sure and get the front edge with color, and then I can come back later on and color the rest of the body tube. All right, and the idea here is to simply roll this down and squash it down there, stick it inside and let it expand. Now when we're ready to do this for real, I'm going to put some glue inside of there. I just want to get an idea of what it's going to look like. And then before the glue sets, you can adjust things as you need to. Okay, so pull that back out. Now that's actually a little bit longer than they suggest. I'm going to go ahead and do that as it just gives it a little bit more grab there. So that's about 1 centimeter. But I'll still have lots of boinginess out there in front. Okay, and for this one we definitely want to put the glue in the tube rather than on the nose cone. Otherwise any excess glue is going to come out all over the rocket. Okay, and again, we don't want too much in there. I'm just going to spread that around a little bit. Okay, and once again I'm going to roll this down to compress it and then slide that in. And as I said, I'm using a little bit more shoulder space there. And now I'm just going to roll this around and then take a look at it endwise. That looks pretty straight. So I'm going to stand that up and let it dry over there. And then we'll do the same thing to this one. check this for straightness again. And that looks pretty good. Okay, so I'm just going to let these finish their drying. And then once the glue is completely dry, I'll finish my coloration on here. And we'll go see how well they launch. My coloration job is finished here. And so I've got one of these that's primarily black, and the other one's primarily blue. And we're going to go ahead and put motors in these. So there's another motor there. And these are just going to friction fit in. Just like that. So we just push that in until it stops. And these should be snug, but not really tight, because in this case the ejection charge is supposed to blow the motor out of the back, and then the rocket just comes back under featherweight recovery. Okay, so those are plenty snug enough. And this rocket pack here has two of those sleeves for the igniters. These are meant to be reused for several launches, so they don't send you as many sleeves as they do igniters or motors. And I'm going to take these out now into the lawn and we'll try launching. 3, 2, 1. And it didn't pop its streamer, but that's about it. Alright, Boingo blue in 3, 2, 1. I completely lost it. It's down, making some bushes. So I launched 3 of these, the 2 Boingos, and then this was one of the ready to fly kits. This one's a Tomahawk. And we recovered 2 of them. The other Boingo appears to be stuck in a hedge of bushes somewhere, but we couldn't find it. This one is supposed to have a streamer that comes out, but the way it wraps around this piston, I really don't think it's going to work that way. I think we need to fold it instead. That was the way it was suggested to run. Fortunately, it's light enough that it just came down in the soft dirt, landed on its nose, and it's fine. The Boingos, though, are very, very light compared to these. They're probably about half the weight. And these actually went up quite a bit higher than I was expecting. And so you might want to give yourself a little bit bigger launch area than you would if you were launching the plastic ready to fly ones. Alright, that's it for me and the Boingos today. And I hope you have as much fun building this and flying it as I did.